small business. And today is the Online Learning Excellence Series, or for short, OLE. And if you are from Spain, we can give it a little nice twist and call it OLE, which is exactly why when we picked the name, we thought it had a nice ring to it. And let me introduce myself. My name is Ayman Tarabishy. I'm the Executive Director for the International Council for Small Business, ICSB. I'm also a teaching professor at the George Washington University. And before we get into the session, I just want to first thank and welcome Dr. Alyssa Grossman, Associate Professor of Clinical Entrepreneurship at the University of Southern California, Marshall School of Business, Lloyd Grief Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. Alyssa has presented at the ICSB World Conferences before, and her vast experience is very exciting because she'll bring in new light, new knowledge, new information, and new data to this series, the OLE series that ICSB have started about 4 years ago across campuses, across conferences worldwide. We actually started the inaugural OLE in California, so we are delighted to come back. History kind of makes sense to start the online version of OLE with our speaker for today, Dr. Alyssa Grossman. OLE itself, Online Learning Excellence, is something 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, a lot of people say, this is interesting, but it's not for me, or this is not something I will ever engage in. But as you have seen with online shopping, have you seen with online education, have you seen even checking in on your airline, checking in your flight, everything is moving towards online. Now we have Cyber Monday. What we're going to have next? We have books, we have many different initiatives happening. The key point here is online is here to stay. Online education is here to stay as well. And therefore, it is important that we understand and learn about online learning, about how to teach, how to engage, and how to connect with the students. You as educators, researchers, professors, and policymakers have a very critical role in this. So with that, we want to inaugurate the OLE online series. I want to thank Dr. Alyssa as well for joining us. Alyssa, are you there? And I heard you have a flu, so I hope you're feeling better here on the West Coast.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to everyone who's here. I am here. I apologize for the lack of voice. I did wake up with what appears to be the beginning of the flu, and I had a voice when I woke up, but somehow in the subsequent 2 hours, I've gone downhill a little bit. But the great news is that one of the beautiful things about online is that it allows you to be at home wearing pajamas and still have a webinar welcoming people to OLE. So I'm excited to be here and have an introductory session. I don't know how much we'll cover today, but we'll cover a little bit. Mostly, I want to hear from you all about what you want to learn. And I want to thank Ayman and Jordan, his trusty assistant, in helping get this started. Do you want me to take over from here, Ayman?
Yes, please.
Okay. So hopefully you have a mechanism to ask any questions that you want to ask along the way. As Ayman said, online learning is here to stay, and I'll tell you a tiny bit about my interest in getting involved. Very briefly, my interest in getting involved began many years ago, probably right around the time or even before what we were calling MOOCs or massively open online courses began to be popular. In part because of education, but in part because I'm a nerd and I love games and puzzles, and that included online games. And I really have felt for a very long time there was an opportunity to take the online space and revolutionize or reinvent the classroom in that online space. In fact, my interest goes back so far that when I was finishing my PhD back in the prior century, I guess not really, I guess maybe it was the early 2000s, I had actually applied for and began to train to be an instructor at the University of Phoenix. And it was really driven, not because I necessarily had a long-term interest in teaching with the University of Phoenix, which probably was unfair to them at the time, but I was young and foolish, but because I really wanted to understand what is this online thing and how does it work? And ultimately, as with so many of us, my career took me into a traditional classroom, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that. But several years ago, I was asked to form a task force, not form a task force, but rather be on a task force at my university in which we considered whether or not we should launch an online MBA program from scratch and build something entirely new. And at the same time as I was doing that, I was working with 2 other schools at my university to determine whether or not a different type of online degree could be built, not specifically within a business school, but at the intersection of several schools, our School of Art and Design, our School of Engineering, and our business school. And so I was very involved in building the curriculum for one, and then I ended up involved not only serving on the task force of the other, but in actually building the course around entrepreneurship, which is what I teach, implementing it, and then teaching it for the last several years. So that's part of my interest. And then the second part of my interest is that while all of this has been going on, of course, again, like so many of you out there, I'm in a traditional classroom wondering what it means, watching my students get more and more involved with their tablets or their laptops or their phones, watching them use things like WhatsApp and GroupMe and SurveyMonkey and all of these other sorts of survey applications, polling applications, communication applications. And I began to become very interested in how might I take some of these technologies into the traditional classroom, not just for the sake of having them there, but in a way that might enhance the effectiveness or the efficiency of the actual classroom. And so I started building that out as something I would talk about sometimes at conferences. And so my hope is that this all can be both of those things, that we can talk about online education, but we can also talk about technology in the traditional classroom, and that it really is a conversation, that it's very rarely about me speaking to people, but rather about us speaking to each other, because we all, I think, probably know or have a vision of one part of what works and what part of what doesn't work, and collectively hopefully the picture is more clear and more powerful. I put together just very few slides today. The first slide just shows you a little bit of my interest, which was to begin to get away from the notion that technology is PowerPoint and that we're somehow making our students better prepared for the world by allowing them to give more and more PowerPoint slides. I actually do think PowerPoint is a very powerful tool if used properly. It'd be hypocritical of me not to say that PowerPoint is useful because I'm using it right now. But I think that there's more that can be done, and there's different things that can even be done with the existing tools. And when I think about this, I do think about the evolution of education as something which began with fireside chats. That's what this picture shows. And has evolved into something like what you see on the right, which is a makerspace/classroom in which I have taught at USC. So I guess that's a little bit of a plug for USC, but it's not meant that way. The reason I chose the picture is because it simply is so different from that which we've seen in prior years. And it's even different than what I went through as a student and what many of you probably went through. These are students who can plug into flat panel monitors, who are using their technology almost exclusively and taking notes, and who aren't even sitting in one fixed place or doing one fixed thing in a classroom. So where before with a fireside chat, perhaps the goal was, or certainly coming out of the one-room schoolhouse, to create worker bees, I think now we talk a lot about how do we embrace the need for individualism while simultaneously teaching people skill in team development and teamwork. How do we prepare people for what is needed in the future? And so with that, I wanted to ask you an opening question evolving sort of, well, if we're going to talk about technology, if you agree with the view that it's not about the technology, it's about how the technology can help us teach, that the technology is merely a tool by which we can be more effective as instructors, then what are we trying to teach? And what I thought is hopefully people would be willing to go to this link that's down at the bottom for Poe Everywhere, to enter their own name or a screen name if you choose to not want to use your own name, and enter as many words as you felt were relevant to understanding more specifically what words describe the skill sets that our students and our kids, for those of us who have kids or grandkids, need to learn now in order to be more effective and successful in the future. And I thought that could perhaps begin to inform the discussion. So I'm going to let you do that for a minute or two, and then hopefully words will show up and we can discuss this. Jordan and Ayman, do I have the ability to hear people on this? Because there's just such silence and I don't see people either. Oops.
Yeah, you can talk to people who are on. We just have to unmute them because they're automatically muted on our side. So
yeah, if I can see anybody who's on a webcam or if anybody wants to sort of raise a question, I'm more than happy with that.
Yeah, so it looks like there's someone, Marge, so I'm going to unmute her, and then maybe you guys can talk. So she's on the line. Go ahead.
Hi, Marge.
Hi, Marge. If you're on the line, if you want to talk, we can see if we have any other questions as of now, too.
I want to know if people are actually trying this survey because I'm not seeing any answers show up.
Oh, Marge does not have any questions, just so you know. She just chatted us.
Okay. Is there a way I can chat with everybody? I'm going to send you a question.
Someone said they weren't able to click on the link from our side. Can we put it in the chat? So would you be able to paste it in the chat function?
I've sent it to you directly.
Okay, great.
Because I don't have access to everybody.
Okay, so I'm going to send it to everyone.
We'll give this a minute or two more, and if it doesn't work, we will shift directions. One of the beautiful things about online is when things don't work, and they sometimes don't, you're going to shift directions. Ah, getting to see some answers now. So as people are doing that, and I do see we're beginning to get some interesting answers now. So as people are beginning to answer that, let me try to take this in a slightly different direction. I regularly give talks with a colleague at the University of Nebraska, a woman named Tanya Means, who will probably join us in the next session. And one of the things we discuss there are that there are several fundamental uses of technology in the classroom, one of which is to provide technology that allows us to deliver content that the students need to learn, provide technology that might enhance students' ability to collaborate, or might allow you to motivate students to learn in the way you want them to learn the content, and to also provide some structure around how people interact, what information they can share, how they share that information, the following. And one of the things Tanya likes to say, I'm a little bit more freewheeling, but she's very structured and very, very good at this, is that there's a huge array of things out there. And this slide is old and it's just the tiniest bit of what exists. And one of the biggest challenges in trying to implement any sort of technology is to know where to begin and to know what tool will work and what tool won't work. And to also not become tool dependent, because if you're tool dependent, and many of these are actually from startups, if the startup then fails, you have a situation in which you know how to use the tool rather than the technique. And you don't necessarily know where to head for the same capability elsewhere. And so she likes to say, and I didn't put this slide in here, you know, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And she suggests, and I think I agree with this, that if you're trying to introduce any sort of a technology, the best way to begin is with bite-sized technologies. Just try one thing at one time and nothing else, sort of like a controlled experiment. There's a few reasons for this. If you're me, I know it very well. It's because if you try multiple things, something's liable to break and then you're stuck, even though the other things might be working. But also, it just increases your comfort level slowly and incrementally, which can be really, really important. And for what it's worth, where I begin is by asking my students what they use most frequently, because usually it's just a subset of the students, not everybody. With respect to online learning, that's a different animal, but even there's the ability to go incrementally to learn how to use the online system before you begin to leverage all the functionality of the online system. Now, some of you might have noticed that I've asked Ayman and Jordan for some help today. You're probably wondering, why is a person who's here to talk about technology and teaching asking about how to use the technology? And the answer again goes to tool dependence. I'm very fluent in WebEx, I'm very fluent in Zoom, but GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar is something that I haven't used a lot. So I'm still on the learning curve with this technology, which is at some fundamental level the same as all of the others, but in terms of idiosyncratic, where do you click sorts of issues, kind of different. So in everything, there is a learning curve. I'm going to try to shrink this again and show you what you've built in terms of a word cloud. And here's the word cloud that we have. We have a small group of people here today, and as a result, the pool of words isn't that huge. But you can begin to see some really, really common things already. The need to be adaptable, the need to be creative, to be independent, to be flexible. I see flexibility in there more than once. I see independence or implied independence in there, the need to cope with uncertainty, all of these sorts of things. So there needs to be anticipatory, which is interesting. They need to understand the world well enough to know what's coming next. And so I think given that sort of setup, technology is a great way to teach, not just because it's the mechanism through which you can communicate, but this is something it took me a while to figure out with my online MBA students, is because just in using the technology, being forced to use the technology, the students naturally become more capable, more adaptable, more comfortable with uncertainty, and frankly, more comfortable with failure. Again, going back to the point I said earlier about lack of reliability. So I have a sense of the skills that you're looking for. I guess my next question for you is, in trying to plan out this web series moving forward, is what technologies do you already use? So let me make sure that that one is open. By going here, shutting this down, hopefully. Going back to my polls, this is Poe Everywhere. For those of you who haven't used it, it's a great tool that allows you to very quickly get information. And I'm going to make it live. Click here. And hopefully, if you now go back to the same website, you'll find this different question, and you can begin to, in an open-ended way, talk about what tools you already use. So I won't spend time talking about what you're already expert in. And again, I'm going to wait. If anybody has any questions, please say that you do have questions, or if you want to share it verbally, we can have a conversation. That would be great. Alternatively, you can put it into the chat box for Ayman, for Jordan, or for me. Kahoot, Wikipedia, blog. The 3 Ps. Oh, wow, this person should be teaching this class. Google Docs, Kaltura, Skype, WordPress, Jing. Sorry about the cough. So I'm going to leave this here, even though it's a different question. I'm going to ask you the question verbally. And the question that I'm going to ask verbally, feel free to put the answer in here unless you're not allowed to continue answering, in which case somebody say that in chat and I'll set up a new question, is which of the tools for those people who have put in more do you find most valuable? Which of the tools do you find most valuable? So let me ask you a different question now. Again, I'm not going to change the slide because this is set up and working. Murally. Okay, Murally is an online whiteboard for those of you who don't know it. It allows people at distributed locations to put Post-its on the equivalent of a whiteboard that shows up on your screen. You can do things like pull in business model canvases or other frameworks, and people can write on it, populate it, link it to websites, link it to videos, all these other things. Adobe Connect is another tool like Zoom or WebEx or what we're using today that allows people to, again, share a lot of information in various ways. I'm a huge fan of Jing. Somebody's mentioned that. I actually just spent part of last night trying to Jing how to Jing to my students, which is kind of funny. You obviously can't do the installation because it has to be installed in order to do it that way. Zoom, very much like WebEx, actually founded by a person who used to work at WebEx and thought there was a better way. We use Zoom now as the tool for our online MBA program. Okay, so let me ask you the next question. My next question is, what are your biggest concerns or problems with the technology tools that you use? What do you think is missing and what would you like to discuss? Lots of questions in there all at once. So I've got in there, what do you wish existed? What do you not know and want to learn? What are your biggest issues? What are examples of tools that are too complex? Yeah, payment is a very big issue, right? If you have students who don't have the discretionary income or do and simply feel that they've paid enough already, that can be complicated, a complicating factor. Outcomes assessment is huge, right? How do you actually know that they're using the tools, that they're using them correctly, that they're learning from them? The lack of the lack of user intuitiveness, the user experience is a very big one for my students. It actually took me a lot of time to realize. I'd stick something in front of a group, think it was easy for them, and I would get the feedback, no, it's not easy at all. Or that it didn't work on tablet when it worked on a laptop, all sorts of issues like that. Oh yeah, whether it will work on the student's computers, system compatibility. I've also had a bandwidth issue. Has anybody else had that? Where if I'm in a class of 40 students and I decide I'm going to systematize this, rather than have them install this outside of the classroom and come ready, it will be easier for me to do it in person. But then, particularly if it's a startup, an in-person issue is misunderstood by the other company's system as some sort of a hacking attack or the like. They don't have the bandwidth to handle, say, 40 registrations at once. And you can end up getting stuck with 10 students into the system and 30 students out of the system. Okay, so these are issues that I think all of us share. So the question is, how do we conquer it together? What do you want these webinars to be? Now, next webinar, I've already discussed with Tanya, the woman I mentioned earlier, the possibility of focusing on online education. She's helped build and manage a lot of the University of Florida's online learning systems. I'm on the other side, having as a faculty member implemented an online program for our MBA degree. And so watching them build that as I was designing it was an interesting experience. And together we felt, she also now is in charge of online learning at the University of Nebraska. Together we felt we could put together some sort of a program that's sort of like the top 10 perils and pitfalls of online learning, the top 10 mistakes that people make and how to avoid them. Or, you know, the top 10 best practices that we've seen that we think are really awesome. And for those people who haven't thought of them, and then if people wanted to share, are those two topics that people would find interesting? And what other topics might people find interesting? Okay. I had the top, I had a slide that addressed a little bit of that. So in terms of delivering content, I find things like YouTube or Vimeo very helpful. Jing, as I said, is a really good way to capture, for those of you who don't know it, 5-minute or less videos where you can capture what's on your screen and speak at the same time. It's free, it is very user intuitive, and it allows people to make videos very quickly and to share them. The challenge with it is, again, that as much as I feel it's user intuitive, students don't always, and not all users do. And also lately, students have become so much more fluent in YouTube and Vimeo that sometimes it's easier for them to do that or use their cell phones and just upload something. So those are some of my favorite and preferred ways to deliver content. Frankly, on collaboration, I'm right with you in terms of all the things we've talked about, in terms of something like Zoom or WebEx. Zoom has become such a natural part and extension of what I do for a living, and maybe others who have done it can comment on this as well, that I find that more and more now at school, if a person is, for example, like me, sick, or is living far away or is traveling for a conference, it simply enables work to go on in a semi-normal, regular way. We've interviewed job candidates using Zoom. We've had people who couldn't attend job talks who Zoom in on the spot. So those sorts of tools, of course, are very, very helpful. Systems like Piazza, those require more learning on the part of the students. It requires more of a change of behavior. I'll give you another example. I have liked in the past systems like Trello or Slack. And as much as I like them, what I find is that students are already dealing with their learning management system. They're learning with, you know, we're doing Canvas, we're doing Blackboard, whatever this is, on top of their other technologies. And then to add too many more can be very complicated and frustrating for them. So with some of these, like a project management system like Trello, which I think is a fantastic system, you have to have student buy-in, and you have to sort of give them the ownership and say, if you're going to own it, if you're going to, you know, it's as good as the discipline with which you apply yourself to this. That's great if it works for you, but it might not be. And similarly, with Slack, we've had a similar issue, which is it's yet another technology, particularly if students are learning online, that they have to layer into their everyday. But one of the messages, I think, is that Slack and some of these tools are used in regular everyday work, and that therefore they're developing a competency above and beyond business thinking competency that might be valuable outside of the classroom. And also that it is efficient. It's a nice way to meet asynchronously and to have information flow keep going even when you're busy. Slack, for example, has desktop notifications if people post things. You can upload documents, and it has a lot of plugins. So you can take things like Trello functionality and plug it in for use. For those of you who don't know what Trello is, that's a project management software that is free of charge. You can go in, you can identify who is on your team, you can create a Trello board, and you can identify every project that needs to happen, every project that's underway, and every project that's completed. You can assign responsibilities, you can upload associated documents, you can have deadlines in terms of dates and times, you can have urgencies, so things can be upvoted and downvoted, and you can drag the to-do list to the different categories as you progress through a project. And that's a perfect example of something I learned from my students. We can definitely actually even have one of these sessions, hopefully on Zoom sometime. I mean, it might be kind of fun if people were coming to have, I don't know, one session on Zoom and then the next one's on WebEx and get to try a few of the different technologies as we're talking. That's something we could do. Going back to the question about the best of the 3 C's, I think there's also, and by the way, with Slack, I had to actually put it in as a required component of the class. So I moved their discussion board out of a traditional discussion board forum into Slack. It's a lot looser, but you can put subgroups, you can rotate in new topics, and it becomes much more organic because it has sort of like a Facebook style discussion feature where people can just come in and say whatever they want and start new threads however they want, and it's very easy. For communication, there's a few listed here. But one of the best ways, obviously, are things like ShareFile, Dropbox, anything that allows you to, from any time and place, have a shared document, and particularly if you can edit those documents. You know, Google Docs, for me, for whatever reason, isn't a perfect fit. But again, and we can talk about this later, I think on top of what your teaching goals are, it's about who you are as a person and what just feels comfortable for you. So if you're not frequently in Gmail or its associated applications, that might not be as intuitive to you as something like Dropbox where you can just click. So I really wanted to just introduce myself this week and start off by sort of brainstorming about a few of these things. So I didn't have grand ambitions, and I hope that's not disappointing. Oh, are there any apps linked to common social networks? You know, that's a very, very interesting question. Are you in an educational environment, and are you in the United States? Those, I guess, are my 2 questions. Poland. Okay. So I can research anything you ask, but I don't know the Polish legal system. So what I would say is that something like Facebook, though it is very possible that people use it to create groups and have students collaborate, and one year I actually tried it with 3 classes simultaneously and discovered that you need some sort of critical mass. And if you get there, it can be really fruitful. And if you don't, you can have sort of this dead, empty Facebook space. One of the issues that I ended up having a long conversation with in the country where I live is that we here have a law called FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And what it basically means is that by law, we're bound to protect the privacy and the confidentiality of all of the students that we have. So there's a variety of applications and tools that are FERPA protected. They have encryptions that rise to the level of a university feeling comfortable with a faculty member using them. And there are others that don't have those. And the result is that there's a great possibility of leakage on the privacy side. And the last time I checked with something like Facebook, which is a common social network, it lacked the FERPA protections. So despite the fact that students use it all of the time, despite the fact that we might personally use it all of the time, it's actually an unwise application to use, at least in the United States, because if the person's privacy settings aren't set effectively, then through your class, people might be able to access a lot of private information about the person. And so I can explore what other social networks are linked to some of these apps. But often there is this question about privacy. So, and my knowledge doesn't tend to extend that far beyond those sorts of apps because I'm not allowed to use them. So that's my own limitation. So maybe we should actually have a session where people from foreign countries, well, you're not from, you don't consider yourself a foreign country, you consider us a foreign country. People from countries other than my own say, here are the most popular apps in Europe. And we can share that and have a conversation. And if any of you want to volunteer to do that as a workshop where we have an interview and a discussion or a panel amongst ourselves, I would love to do that and know what's sort of state of the art elsewhere. But at least here, there's some limitations. I will say that in this country, there was an effort to launch a Facebook equivalent, FERPA protected business called YellowDig. Has anybody ever used YellowDig? It really feels very much like Facebook. And the feedback that I got from students, which constitutes another one of these biggest obstacles, was the feeling, well, we already have Facebook, so why are we using YellowDig, which is spelled exactly like that, but with 2 G's, YellowDigg. So, for me, that was a failed project trying to use YellowDig. And it doesn't mean I've lost faith in YellowDig. It means, and I think this goes to the question about obstacles, that you need to know how to get the students to engage. And I gave up on that one before figuring it out, but I'm sure there's a way, make it a part of the grade, make sure there's bonuses, these sorts of things. But I think that one of the biggest obstacles outside of the technology-based obstacles is this notion of how do you organically integrate something into a class so it doesn't feel like busy work to the students. So it doesn't feel like something they're doing just for the sake of doing it. So it feels like something that's integrally linked to whatever project they're working on or whatever concepts you're trying to teach. Now, I think that goes back to a comment someone said earlier about the difficulty of assessing learning using the online tools. And my first response to that would be, it's not up to the tool to get the learning. It's up to the faculty member to figure out what are my desired learning outcomes, what tool do I think might help me get there, and then what assessment will I build to know that in using this tool, the learning outcome was enhanced or at least neutral, but not diminished. So I think I'm going to wind it down for today. It's always very strange to speak just to a camera. You don't really know if people are getting anything out of it. I'm not really trying to instruct on anything today. I really just wanted some preliminary feedback. So I have two questions before I leave, which is, would you rather we talked about specific tools, apps, Zoom, these sorts of things next time? Or would you prefer that I go down the path that I was planning, which has to do with sort of best and most problematic new user practices in the more traditional online education space? So where do people play out on that one?
Listen, I'm also online again, so
Okay.
we're good to go here. So let's wait till some people answer, and then we can go from there.
Oh, the first two answers are the total opposites. Oh, no, a combination of both. That's the peacemaker. Now we have the three options. Okay.
We do have a global audience here, so.
Okay, strengths and weaknesses.
Great.
Okay.
Listen, again, exceptional presentation. Missed a couple of minutes of it, but it's an exceptional presentation, and I knew this is what our ICSB global members wanted to hear or start the dialogue here, and that was the absolute reason why we started OLE 4 years ago, but we realized it's tough for everybody to be at the conference or to be in an event all the time. So the online medium is exactly what it's meant to be, to start a global conversation here. And saying this, we are going to start these series, and we'll try to figure them as a monthly series, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm excited also to say that we're planning big here. This is not just ICSB. We have our USASB affiliate that has focus on entrepreneurship education, and entrepreneurship education for them encompasses everything national, regional, global, and I think USASB is also considering intergalactic for all purposes, because entrepreneurship education is not just a U.S. thing, it's a global thing. So we were delighted that you...
SpaceX a few days.
Intergalactic, yes. So you can... that's our U.S. affiliate. We also have our Canadian affiliate that are focusing on this on their May conference. We have our European affiliate also doing a special, what I call it, a mini boutique conference on 3E, which is entrepreneurship education as well. We have our colleagues in Asia looking at entrepreneurship education and small business education. We're looking at our colleagues from Australia, New Zealand, and our colleagues from the Middle East. Egypt has a conference in November in which they actually target the youth. So we are just delighted. We are just excited to bring all this together. But in particular, we're putting together our intergalactic team of all of ICSB, all of its affiliates worldwide, and we're putting them together to come to Taiwan for our ICSB Global Congress. And we're going to have a major session on OLE. So we're just warming up here. So this is just the start. Saying warming up, Alyssa, I think you need to warm up, have some tea, have chamomile tea, some lemon tea, relax. We want to thank you tremendously for your effort and energy. This has been just incredible here. I want to thank Jordan and the ICSB International Office as well for organizing this. This has been fantastic. We'll put it up in our newsletter. We'll put the recording as well for people to download, and we'll start creating this group here. With that, a big round of applause for Alyssa and everybody. I want to thank you all for joining, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you, everybody.
I'll share the link. Thank you, people. Thank you, everybody.